Welcome back to this week's episode of the Lady Landlords podcast. Today we have a very special guest, my very own home inspector, Marc Anthony of Pro Home Inspector. Marc, how you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, actually.
Good.
Very well.
I like that answer better than the regular, like, I'm fine, how are you? So, but thank you so much for joining us today. I wanted to have you on because I think it's so important for our ladies to understand when they are buying property, how to make sure to find the right person, what that looks like, what to expect through a home inspection. So I really appreciate you coming on and being able to share that experience from really your perspective. So thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
I was hoping we can just start by you just sharing a little bit about who you are as the person, Marc Anthony.
Sure. Overall, listen, I've been an entrepreneur all my life, and a lot of my life sort of comes back to that, even my passions and joys. Music and reading and theater and entertainment, cocktails. All of it sort of has fallen into my life, and construction and building and creating are things that I'm very passionate about. And I've found ways through my entire life to incorporate them and find ways to make money by doing things that I enjoy. So that's a blessing that I sort of just happened and fell into. But that's something that I love, and I'm continuing that passion in many ways. And through my ventures in real estate and also being a property owner and landlord myself, I'm earning some more freedoms to be able to do more exciting things that I am more passionate about, like comedy and things of that nature. And I may be investing in a comedy club. So just fun stuff and things like that. I'm always on the go, always something to do.
That you very much are. That I've definitely known about you, and I've actually always loved kind of that entrepreneurial spirit that you have. That very much aligns with myself and our listeners, because really the reason that most of us, if not all of us, are here is to really use real estate and rental properties as a vehicle for financial freedom, where then we can go and spend more time on our passions and maybe the things that don't make us as much money, or just really give us those other opportunities to kind of live life to the fullest. So that's one of the reasons, besides your amazing skills and expertise, things that I actually love is that I get to see you working on different projects and other things that really light you up. And then we actually can kind of combine and kind of work together on the real estate front. But otherwise, like I prefer to work with somebody that has kind of those same motivations that I have. So now this kind of is almost like a chicken versus the egg situation here. Were you landlord, owner of rental properties before you became a home inspector, or were you the home inspector first and then we're like, man, I should just buy these things myself?
I was a landowner first, property owner first. And I did, however, it was in the bust, the 08, 09 bust. And I took advantage of the market in Florida. I had cash, and I was able to buy 3-2 townhouses, beautiful, gorgeous, gated communities, 5 miles from Mickey, and for $50,000 cash, and they were in the 300s. So I got into it not thinking long term. And I picked up 5 units, and I kept them for a couple of years, and then it went up, and I one plus my money, I doubled my money plus, and I used it to roll into something else. I regret that now. I wish I had those properties. So I then rebooted my thinking as I've gotten a little older, and a little bit more passionate about wanting to have more freedoms. And then I started reinvesting again. And looking for that good net on investment, my monthly return, and really focusing. Back then, my first round, although I had yearly tenants and it was great, I really didn't put a lot of effort into it. I just took advantage of the market.
Gotcha. And a lot of our listeners kind of fell into real estate themselves, right? Myself, it was in the same way. I never planned on owning rental properties. My husband really wanted to own a home, right? It was that American dream for him being an immigrant from the Dominican Republic. He wanted the white picket fence. I could care less. I was just like, I just don't want to be living mortgage payment to mortgage payment. So let's buy a multifamily. And here we are 10 units later, 3 years later, right? So now all of a sudden, yes, I had to kind of go back and be like, okay, let's learn my numbers. Let's learn what a good investment is. Let's learn really what the properties I should be buying. But at least what's important for you too is you jumped in, you got involved in it, and then fine, there's things that you wish maybe you done differently, but at least you did it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
So
I know. I saw the
then,
value.
yeah. And once again, now you're still moving forward with it. So you have property down in Florida in
I
addition
do.
to New York.
Yes, I do. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. I just didn't know if there were any other states in there that I missed that you that you
I'm,
also
I'm,
had
I'm,
property in.
when I get back, I'm going to be venturing, I think, into Connecticut, possibly.
Possibly.
Looking
Okay.
at some multis in Connecticut in a couple of regions that are hot and popping and still reasonably priced with a good return.
I know my realtor keeps telling me about those areas too. So
Yes.
I might have
Yes.
to connect you two together.
Sounds
But
good.
so how did you then end up becoming a home inspector?
Well, I was in the businesses I've been in, and from medicine to restaurants to chain restaurants. I became, and also building my own home. I've essentially been in the trades for 25 years or more, because I was GCing everything, maybe a bit of a control measure, but I also was learning quickly what needed to be done. And I knew that I could cut out a GC and GC myself, general contractor, and sub out to people to do the work. So quickly you have to learn every stage, especially when you go from a ground up construction, which I've done. So that and renovations, which I've done a lot more of. So with all of that, I had this strong background, and it never really dawned on me about the home inspection business, except that I was always interested in the roundness of real estate. And I had a connection with a friend who was a home inspector. And he hit me one day and he said, we went out for a beer and you were giving me some melancholy that you just don't think you're busy enough. And if anybody was to look at me, they would say, you are nothing but busy. But if I can find extra time in my life and I get excited and passionate about something, then I want to, all right, so let's see what it's all about. So he took me out and I was blown away. And I loved his approach, educational and extremely knowledgeable. And I saw two things pop into my head. One, I could make a good living doing this and helping people educate themselves on what they're buying. And I could also position myself to understand what I'm buying, and also network with realtors to get myself to a position to be able to buy my own properties. So it all sort of came together. It came together that way. And then I found a real passion for it, and I didn't realize how many realtors I knew from Facebook and social media, because I never approached them from that way. It was just friendly and, holiday stuff and postings, and also about my restaurants. So the long and short is that's how I got in. It became an instant flame and then a burning fire. And then I got really excited about, homes, and then multifamilies, and then really old homes are exciting and fun to do. And commercial, not so fun, but still good. And
Different.
different.
We'll go with different.
We'll go with different. So yeah, it's been a burning, real strong flame for 5 years now.
Yeah. And great success. I see you everywhere throughout
Yes.
New York, and I know you're licensed in Connecticut and also in Florida, which is kind of nice. So it's almost like you get to work on vacation, right? You can still keep busy no matter where you go.
I do.
So let's talk about now, for our listeners out there, how to find a home inspector, right? I feel like this is such a nerve-wracking thing for us because we have one chance, right? We're just going to hire one person that we're going to go with here. And then that's the inspection they're going to do. So we need to make sure that we find the right person to even do the home inspection to really set us up. So what should I look for or do to find the right home inspector?
I think the basis of any kind of interview that you're going to do for anybody, contractor or what, it's the same process. You want to first look at experience, and its experience in a particular genre as well. I mean, a home inspector can cover a lot of things, like we just mentioned, single family homes, multi-family units, commercial, etc. So from a landlord or purchasing process to buy investment properties, it's good to have somebody who has experience in that, and in maybe even owning. Maybe not everybody does, but at least coming from a perspective of what can I do to maximize this property, and what's my cost? What are my costs going to be? So a well-rounded inspector should give you a full portfolio of the house, meaning it becomes a manual to the units, or a unit, single, whatever you're buying. So it's not just the bad, it's also the good, as well as a list of immediate things that need to be repaired, things that you may be able to put on a burner to budget for. So it helps to have an experienced investing, home inspector, in my opinion.
That is actually something that I was going to ask. Do you feel that you offer almost an extra service to people, especially investors like myself, by being an investor yourself? And I will say, to let you know, that that was something that I found very appealing about working with you, was because I knew that you would have that eye to say, okay, hey, this needs to be done. This is what this cost is going to be. This can wait. This needs to be immediate. Hey, if you got tenants, this is going to be a safety hazard. This is not. And when I've seen your reports now for the couple deals we've done together, you make sure that it's very clear for me what I need to be thinking about from a liability perspective, having renters, and then also thinking about what costs I'm going to have moving forward. Not just saying, okay, well, this is going to be my house for the next 50 years. So of course I'm going to have to do a roof, but you make sure to point that out to me from an investment standpoint, to make sure that I know what my CapExes are and what things that I really need to do today immediately versus what things I need to really think about for the return on my investment.
I absolutely. And I think the added value, if you can find the right inspector in your area that maybe has that experience or has done many investment properties, or has clients that are repeat clients that are investors, the relationship building and the availability to not just do the job, send you a report, and good luck. It's the continued conversations. Maybe it's, can you take a quick look at a listing for me? And do you know anything about this area? Do you know anything in, are there problematic things that you should know? And there are areas I know that I would steer away from, because I would steer away from. That I know other investors that are getting out of those areas, and why. So there's a lot of value that we can have in discussions that necessarily don't go in a report. That stuff's not really appropriate for a report, but
not necessarily appropriate for a report. But I like what you're saying about really kind of that holistic approach. And one thing that I have found really helpful after building that relationship with you is that there's been a time or two that I've been at a property that I've been able to kind of send you a picture, just being like, most recently that roof in upstate New York, that I was just like, hey, does this look a little wonky to you? Is this how this is supposed to look because it's an old property, or is this something that I should be concerned with? And having just those answers kind of up front, and having just that availability to just ask you a question here and there is really helpful. If I did an inspection on every single property I looked at or saw that I had somebody send me pictures of that I was interested in, that'd be costing me a pretty penny. I could retire you pretty fast, but I appreciate being able to kind of have that conversation and really get that holistic picture. Like you're saying, when now we evaluate that property, not just be like, hey, here you go, here's your document. Now we can check the box that you did an inspection, but really have an understanding of what's in that, and what, for me as an investor, would help me make a good decision versus a bad decision.
Without question, my approach and my team approach is that way. Every house I inspect, or my team inspects, we approach it as, are we buying it for ourselves? We're buying it for our mother. Those are the two things that sort of go through our minds when we're entering a property. From my standpoint, because a big portion of my life is also being a landlord, I approach everything from that standpoint, especially from an investment standpoint. But even when it's a single family, if you're just going to buy for yourself, I'm still going to approach those things, maybe not as intently that we're going to be talking about lawsuits and liability. But those are the things that I'm aware of, and those are the things that you have to be concerned of.
Right.
and safety, above and beyond safety, to make sure your tenants are safe and the children are safe that are going to be living there and those types of things. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's a big part of what I do, my team does, and I'm proud of that fact because it does set us apart.
It does. So now what if I'm in an area where I don't have a Mark Anthony and I'm calling around and I've talked to a couple home inspectors and none of them seem to own property themselves. What question would you recommend I can ask to know if that home inspector is going to be a good option for me?
Sure. I think a couple of basics to at least start with of how long have they been doing inspections? And that's
Okay.
easily provable. First of all, it's a relationship too, right on the phone. If you don't feel comfortable and they're not willing to take the time with you on the phone, my average first phone call with a client is 20 to 30 minutes. If they're willing
Nice.
to have the time to talk. I'd
Yeah.
rather explain to you everything that you're hiring a home inspector for. And we're advocates. I'm your advocate. At the end of the day, as you know, I don't care if you buy it or not.
Right.
I'm going to tell you the truth, the
Right.
ugly truth, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And what's it going to, give you a general idea what you're getting into, and what are my costs going to be, and how soon am I going to have to replace this roof, and et cetera, et cetera. So, speaking to in another area with an inspector, I guess the answer would be, how long have you been doing this?
Yeah.
Can you give me a description of your services? My introduction always starts with, what is the intent of this property? Or is it for your home personal use, first time buyer, or are you an investor? Because it's the same approach physically, but there is so much more I can give to an investor that a homeowner just doesn't need. You know what I mean?
Right. Exactly.
So,
You need to be able to frame things for the right
right,
person, provide them with really
correct.
the service that they're looking for.
Right. So if you have somebody, and there are a lot of inspectors, I think, that just do that punch list, foundation, siding, windows, doors, and do their thing and then move on. They don't have much else to offer. So I think finding out how long they've been in, and if they don't personally own properties, it's a fair question. Do you own any rentals? I'm an investor. No, but I work with some. Oh, great. Do you have any repeat? Yes, I do. Was it possible I could maybe shoot them an email? Something like that. If I have a repeat client, which I have many of, I'm confident that anyone I asked, unless they just didn't like to talk to people, I could ask, could I send you, for a recommendation? So I think that's something that may be helpful.
Oh, yes, that would be.
And taking that approach. But if they're not willing to spend the time on the phone with you to begin with, and it's sort of a rush, or you never even get to speak to them, and it's an answering service, which some do operate that way, then you may just be in a plug and play situation where you may end up with a new out of school inspector who's not going to have the experience, no matter however you prepare it. The states require schooling, and they require maybe 40 to 100 hours in the field, depending upon the state. That's just nowhere near enough to really know your ins and outs. It takes years.
Okay. So I like that, because then actually the next question I was going to ask you was like, what is the biggest red flag that an inspector can throw up for me that I'm like, no, I'm not working with this person, or they're just not really a good fit for me as an investor. So it sounds like that answering service, or if they're not willing to actually have a conversation with you. And honestly, I feel that way, just so you're aware, I feel that way about every single service provider. If it's a realtor, an attorney, if you're not willing to have a conversation with me when I'm willing to give you money, this is not starting off a very good balance in that relationship now, is it?
I agree. And I've will take as much time as needed to explain the services once I've determined what your goal is with the property. Because sometimes you can see it's clearly a rehab house, and then I say, are you a flipper? Yeah. Are you, because now I know I have to give detailed punch lists for flippers and things to be concerned about, from upgrades of interior wall electric or whatever. There's a wide variety of things. So once you determine what it is, then you want to have that conversation. And so it's willing to talk to the client is a big thing for me. And I would think it should be for someone who's looking to make a big investment. Secondly, experience, and which you can verify by going to any state, quick Google, that state's license board, and they'll have their license. You ask them to send you a business card or get their license number, and you can verify that. You can also verify if they have any complaints. Okay. I'm not a big fan of Yelps of the world and all that, because but it's something that you can look into. I have Google reviews. You can check Google reviews, but experience and the possibility of speaking to somebody that maybe they do work with continuously will give you an indication if they actually deal with investors.
Gotcha. Okay, I like those tips. I think that's going to really help our listeners be able to find the right person to be able to work with. So, okay, so now I made my phone calls, I asked my questions, I'm the right inspector that I want to work with. Now we show up the day of the inspection. What are the expectations that I should have a view of that day? What should I do as now the buyer? Do I
Sure.
follow you around with a flashlight? And I do. So, but for most people, what do you really, what should the expectations be of the two roles then?
Usually the first time I'm working with an investor, and if it looks like it's going to be an investor who, and we've had a conversation because I spent the time, that may already have some properties and is a continuing investor, the first time through, trailing and discussing and going through things as we're going, instead of doing the entire inspection and talking at the end, maybe the first time through till you're familiar with me and familiar with the process, is definitely something to consider. So you would ask as part of your questions, what am I to do? Some inspectors are very strict, and I understand why. That let me do my inspection. I have a set protocol so I don't miss anything. You're paying me to be thorough, so allow me to do so. If you want to trail me, write down any questions you have, write down any things that you're not sure of. There are no stupid questions, trust me. We're learning every day because people get creative. Flippers get creative. Why is that there? I don't know. It may be hiding something. How old is this house? So there's a lot of things to consider. So some inspectors say, let me do my thing, let me focus, and then I'm going to take the time after to go through the summary with you and point out everything, and we'll have an open discussion from there. And any notes that you took, if I didn't cover it, we'll go through it. Some like to walk and talk. So it depends on the inspector. And you can question that. How do you run your inspections? So you can use your time valuably. If they are really the right fit, but they say, listen, I'm best serving you doing my routine so I don't miss a thing. That's what you're paying me for. Then I will take as much time as you need at the end, and we'll go through everything I found, no questions asked. I'm not gonna walk out of here until you have every question answered. Then just trail them and take your notes, don't distract, let them focus. When I'm looking at an electrical panel, I'm literally looking at 15, 20 different things that you would never think to be looking at, but I am.
No, never. That's why I hired you.
Right.
There's not 20 things I can even think of to look at an electric panel for. And I'd be bored after 2 seconds. So
correct. So I would ask that question. There's varying ways. I prefer in the beginning, when I do home inspections, I generally give them an assignment of tape measure, feel the space. You will rush through this process. For investors, it may have been also a quick in and out, really go through, really look at every room, look at every apartment, and write down your questions. And if I don't cover it, we'll go through it. Some of it may be cosmetic and that really doesn't fall into home inspection from a standpoint of eye of the beholder, circa 1970s, but if it all works, it's great. So everybody's individual goals vary. As an inspector, so aesthetics don't play a huge role. Damage does.
Well, I think that's actually one of the biggest misnomers about home inspectors. And I will even say this from my own experience with the first property that we bought. I was almost really expecting a home inspector to more tell us about those upgrades and things like that we should be doing more from that cosmetic kind of side, rather than kind of the mechanicals and that type of stuff. So that was actually something that even from my perspective, I was a little bit surprised by what I got in my first inspection report, when I was hey, but we totally missed that that window's like sideways. And I was like, but it's fine. The window functions. It's not
Right.
letting heat out. It's not
Right.
causing any hazards. It's installed properly. It just happens to be on an angle. And I'm like, oh,
Right.
every day I look at that window and I'm like, I know that that is not level, but once again,
Yeah.
that's not something that a home inspector is looking for, right? It's
Correct.
functional, it's safe, it's
Correct.
installed properly, it's not going to cause me any problems. You know, the fact that it's on its side is more of a me problem than a you problem.
It's
So
it's more of a workmanship or or decision from a previous life in the house. So yeah, it's about functionality, safety. Bones of the house are important. The structure, the roofing, the mechanicals, the things that are the big ticket items are the real major things to focus on, and then health and safety, of course, and then the honey-do list, as I mentioned, as I call it, because I do get as detailed if there's a knob missing or a loose hinge on a kitchen cabinet. That's the punch list, you know, the simple punch list that generally doesn't affect a deal either way, because no seller really wants to hear about that. But at least you know it's there if you want to address it or not. Depends if it's occupied or not.
well,
So,
let's get into that then. So now I like the idea of what you said of when you go for that actual inspection the day of, to make sure that roles and expectations and how people like to work is clear up front. I really like that. I feel like that should kind of be a part of that like interview process, right?
right.
Then now too, we get through the inspection. Now I know from you, I get like 170 pages of detailed information. So what should I as an investor do with that report?
Okay, so within the report is another report, a sub-report usually, or should be. That's a summary, and the summary will be your bullet points of the things we have of concern falling into those three categories I talked about. Dollar sign, big picture structural or mechanical replacements. Second, health and safety, trip hazards, loose railings, that kind of thing. Non GFI breakers or outlets missing, or etc. And then the honey-do list. So that should really be in a section where you can focus on that for your deal purposes to then put together what your costs are going to be to get in to get this thing up and running if necessary, or what your maintenance level of comfort is of, I already have existing tenants, nobody's complaining, I'm going to leave it until I do an upgrade at some down the road or in between, or I just feel like I want to upgrade it now and keep that tenant, but maybe I can get more on an increase when their lease is up. So because they see I'm putting some money in, and you know, if you can do some things yourself or have it have somebody in your network that doesn't cost you an arm and a leg, then it may be valued to do. It depends on the market, of course. So yeah, you're looking for inside that report, I would think, the summary, and then you have your casual reading when you have time to go through the overall picture of everything, because we cover everything, not just the bed. You know, I want you to see what you're buying. It's a timestamp.
Correct. And I think what's kind of important there is to not be discouraged when you get 170 pages, right?
Yeah, no.
Not every single item on that 170 pages is a negotiation point, is a deal breaker, is something that we need to kind of go back to the seller to have them fix that, right?
No, correct.
So really, I like that you kind of broke that down into like, what are the big ticket items? What are the safety issues? Those two, at least from my perspective, are usually what I look for from a negotiation standpoint, that I can kind of use those things. Then that honey-do list that's at the end, which usually is the other 165 pages, usually that rest of that, those are then maybe something I could possibly use to either figure out, like you're kind of saying, what I'm going to have to do in the future, what I could possibly do, what improvements might need to be made to give the tenants a better quality of life to keep them there longer. Right. But it could be possibly used, in my experience, as kind of that negotiation where you're just kind of saying like, well, but look at all these other things. I'm only asking for the big ticket and the safety items.
Right.
And really, we know that really that honey-do list are really, once again, like you're saying, a knob missing here, a hinge, really kind of one of those smaller things that are not kind of deal breakers. So I do want people to understand that all because you get that 170 page report, we should be thanking our home inspectors for that, because that meant that they really went through things. But that does not mean that that is 170 pages of items you get to go back to that seller with and say, hey, actually, when all these things are fixed, you should actually pay me to be taking the house off your hand, right? So when we look at then those kind of categories, right? So we had those three things we're talking about now. We got our big ticket items, we got our safety items. We're going to take that honey-do list off. We already talked about that. Those are just kind of the good to knows. So now talking about your big ticket list and your safety hazards. What are the words, the red flags, the things that should be putting light bulbs in my head that when I see, I've got to be like, whoa, like this is something I really need to consider, or this is a project or a cost that might be a little bit, that's going to be a little more involved than just slapping some paint and redoing some carpet.
Sure. Anytime you hear the word recommend further evaluation by a structural engineer, massive red flag. We start generally in the basements and work our way up. The areas that are going to tell the most about the house are the basement and the attic. Those are the entry points. Those are the most vulnerable places in the home. So depending upon where you are in the country, you may have a basement. A lot of parts of the country do not.
That's true.
So depending upon where you are, but in our region, in New York and Connecticut, there are basements everywhere. So it's looking at the structural, the foundation condition, the structural supports, the floor joists, wood destroying insect damage, a lot of temporary supports that are put in place, a lot of fixie jobbies all over the place, homeowner fixes, those kinds of things. If the inspector deems it where it's to a level that it needs a further evaluation, especially if it's an older home. I've done many homes that were built in the 1700s. So those homes were built in a different style of framing altogether, which most people don't even know about, called balloon framing. And the design can lend itself to have a lot of problems with flooring and all kinds of things going on, depending upon.
I'm picturing like kind of that warped flooring, right? Where then all of a sudden you put a marble on one side of the floor and it could roll completely to the other side. Is that what you're referring to?
At times, yes. Sometimes
Okay.
the builds are a little bit different and they have center collapse. So everything's going inward.
Anything falls to this. I'm trying to create a good picture here for our listeners. So that's really where everything's going to kind of sink into the middle of the floor. Right. Okay.
So you can see some pretty heavy sloping floors and twisted doorways, and the doors have been cut to shut again, and all those things are happening. And then underneath in the basement, you're seeing a lot of supports. And really, if they're done professionally, it's okay. You have to expect a certain amount of that to be going on in a home that's a couple hundred years old. You just have to. And when I talk to a client in that initial phone call, I'm looking at the listing. So when I see the age, I immediately say, this is how we're doing. This is what we're going through. These are the steps. Here's the process from starting with the roof and working their way down. I say you have to expect that we're going to have some sloping floors, that we're going to have some crooked windows, that we're going to have some crooked doors. So you set the expectation so it's realistic. And then it's really, if it's done well and they've continued to stop the sinking with proper support systems, then fine, you've got sloping floors.
Exactly. Well, that's something that we actually went through just a couple of weeks ago. One of the properties that I was looking at was from 1800, 1810, somewhere in there. And I actually love that little, I'm going to call it the character pieces, right? Where it had the little bit of a change in the floors, and you could tell that some of the doors had to be shifted a little bit to make things fit after, a couple hundred years here. But what it really kind of came down to, and that was actually one of the red flags in my summary report from you, was about the structure of that property, and that it was really something that we had to look into more. And I know that this tends to be a sticking point for some of our members, so I really want to address it. I ended up walking away from that deal after the inspection. And I know sometimes that kills certain investors to be like, oh, I had to pay for this inspection and now I'm not even buying the house. And I see that as a thank you for saving me, possibly thousands and thousands of dollars, huge headaches, huge problems that I was now going to have to mitigate and spend time to fix. And God knows what would have happened. So to me, it's more of a thank you for charging me a couple $100s to have learned those things. So I do think it's important to also have our listeners understand that the inspection is to make sure that you know what's going on in that property. So that way you can make your best decision from that standpoint. and it's okay if you walk away. And I that was exactly how I felt in that property. You know, as much as I like the little quirkiness to a couple things, and I like the cash flow I would have gotten, it would have all been destroyed, and it could have really impacted then the entire rest of my portfolio if I'd made a bad decision to buy a property that had a ton of structural damage, like the one that we recently looked at did. So
Without question. And you know, I've experienced clients come back and thank me profusely that I found some issues that were just you know, insurmountable for their deal, and they moved on to their next deal, and then they asked me for a discount. And I said, well, I just saved you a fortune and a nightmare, because that's what I get paid to do, and now you're asking me to discount my services. You're thanking me on one standpoint, and then you're saying, well, I'm a repeat customer. Yeah, you know, I can take some of that into consideration, but you know, at the end of the day, you're paying a service to make sure you make a good investment, and that's part of doing business, like with anything, not just this business, any business. So it's a loss leader, is what I call it, and it protects it's a protection, you know.
Exactly.
And another thing, just to come back to that quickly, it just hit me. Another thing that I'm very particular about is insurance. So when you're interviewing for an inspector, many states will let you operate with like 35,000 or 50,000 in insurance. Now, if you're buying a $500,000 house or $1 million house or a $10 million house, what's that going to do for you if I miss something? Nothing.
Zero. Nothing.
So you need somebody who at the minimum has $1 million, $3 million coverage if they miss something. I mean, we're not infallible, we're human. If something gets missed, in the rare occasion that it may happen, at least I have the insurance that will cover you. You know,
that's
if you bought the purpose, you buy the property, something was completely missed, you know, whether it was maybe hidden or it showed itself later, there may be some sort of recourse to help mitigate that cost.
Well, I don't want to have other home inspectors get upset with you, but let's talk about that for a second. So now let's say, right, we got the report, we went through it, I negotiated my couple items. I didn't see any of these big ticket items like the structural issues that we're talking about or anything else that's those major red flags, and I move forward with the property. Now, after I close, I realize that there is an issue here, there, or wherever else. What recourse do I have at that point? Do I go back to you as my home inspector? Do I go back to my attorney that helped my realtor that helped me through those negotiations? Do I get upset with my attorney who let me close? Who's the person that I go to in this situation?
In my opinion, I'd rather, for me personally, I always try to address things direct. So my first course of action would be to contact the home inspector. And I would say, I'm looking at the report, and this is what, either there's no section whatsoever showing what happened here.
You checked no plumbing. What did you do?
You didn't show me, right, whatever it may be. The holding tank and it has a well and it burst, and you don't even have any pictures of it. You don't have an age on it, you don't have anything. And it was clearly rusted, you know, and give them an opportunity to make it right. They should offer to come out for free and review. And you know, if they can resolve it, they'll resolve it. If they say, you know what, I missed it, or if for some reason it just didn't make it into the report, whatever, here's my insurance. Let's, you know, if I can't afford it out of my pocket just to make it right, then, you know, let's put a claim in through your homeowners, which will then go to my insurance. And that it could work that way. But I always like to take that route. If they stonewall you right away, then just call your homeowners, and the homeowners will be able to track down their information through their license.
And then let's do also to make the home inspectors happy that are listening to this, because we also want to make sure that it's clear that when you close on a house, all because now something is wrong with the property that you bought, it does not mean that the home inspector is at fault. Okay. So I want to make sure that we're also very clear on that here, Mark, that all because
100%.
now we move into the property and, you know, we find out, or we have tenants that moved in that called because, you know, they got the little shaky handle when they're trying to flush the toilet here, that is not all of a sudden a responsibility of that home inspector.
Correct.
So we want to be very clear on what items are those larger ticket items that are part of a home inspection that are missed. Once again, everyone in this world has the capability to make mistakes.
Yeah.
Versus, okay, well, now we're in the property and something broke. Welcome to home ownership, right?
Correct. Yeah, I mean, you have to be realistic here.
Yes.
You're not going to do anybody any favors except wasting time if you think that all of a sudden, because you paid $400, $500, $600 for an inspection, that now I'm on the hook for your $500,000 investment property.
You ain't coming over to change my light bulbs?
Yeah.
No?
Tomorrow.
Gotcha. That's actually really helpful. I'm glad actually that you brought that up and mentioned about the insurance. I'm really
Yeah,
happy
I think it's a fiduciary responsibility, in my opinion, that you have good insurance. So it's a good question to ask. What your insurance coverage is, and just have it in an email so you can at least show that they gave you that information.
I like that. Always get things in writing. Yes.
Agreed.
All right. So, Marc, this has been incredibly informative. I incredibly appreciate your time here. Any other last tips that you kind of thought of as we were talking that our ladies should think about, consider when working with a home inspector that you'd want to add in?
I think the approach in that first conversation and knowing that that inspector is going to stay with you. I tell all my clients that I don't care if you call me 3 years from now. If you have a question, I can always refer back to that time, that date and time. And I'll always be able to unarchive and be there for you to answer questions about where you started 3 years ago, and offer advice any way I can. I think in a continued relationship in that way, or at least knowing you have that safety net. I don't quite remember this, or it never came up before. And then I looked at it and you know what, you did report on it. It just didn't dawn on me. Can you help me? Can you explain it to me again and take me through it? So I think having a relationship with a home inspector who's willing to be there for you, whether it's 6 months, a year, or 2 years down the road.
Yeah. I completely agree. And I think that we always kind of hear that real estate really is a relationship business. And that completely is the truth between whatever type of vendor or service provider you're working with, whether it be your home inspector, your realtor, your mortgage broker, whoever it may be. So, Marc, that's a great last remark. Thank you so much for being on our episode today. I appreciate it. Ladies, please make sure if you are looking for home inspector needs in New York, Connecticut, or Florida, that I did add Marc's contact information into our show notes. So feel free to reach out to him to use his services as well. Otherwise, I will see you all back here next week for the following episode of the Lady Landlords podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you get notified when new episodes are released every single week. Thank you, and see you back in the Lady Landlords Facebook group.